So hello everyone again. Today I'm going to show you my favorite chess game and the game that many consider the most beautiful chess game ever played. And it was played between Garry Kasparov and Kasparow Topalow in 1999. I guess you should know both of the players. Kasparov and Topalow, they both have been the world chess champions. Both are very famous, so I will not even waste any time explaining their past. I will just go through the game and show you the most beautiful that I think has ever been played. So e4 by Kasparov and d6, which is an invitation to the so-called Pirc defense, which Kasparov accepted. So he took the center, and now of course there is a pressure on the e4 pawn, but Kasparov has a pawn duel in the center, which of course is a long-term advantage. And here black looks to develop his dark square bishop on g7 and put pressure on d4, and also prepare to castle kingside. Bishop e3 is a multi-purpose move. It develops the bishop from c1, prepares also castling queenside, and also reinforces the pawn on d4. And of course there is an idea of playing queen d2 and then bringing the bishop over to h6, which is a common attacking idea in variations of Pirc and Sicilian Dragon. So bishop g7, queen d2. As I mentioned before, white is getting ready to castle and to play bishop h6. Now c6 by Topalow, and this actually shows the very good understanding of the position. He knows that there is a big possibility that Kasparov will go queenside, Topalow will go kingside. So in an opposite side castling positions, you want to advance your pawns on the wing of your opponent's king. So in this case, Kasparov would advance the h and g pawns, and Topalow wants to advance the b and a pawns, which this move c6 supports. Of course, it takes control of the b5 square so that the b5 pawn can go there. f3, another multi-purpose move, not only defending the e4 pawn, but also preparing for g4, which is an aggressive idea. Of course, as I mentioned before, there is a possibility for an opposite side casting, so both sides are getting ready to advance the pawns where they want to. And of course this rules out the possibility of the knight coming to g4 and attacking the bishop on e3. So b5, an idea that seems threatening, because after b4 is played, let's say, the knight can be dislodged, but it's not that big of a problem, and Kasparov played knight g2. If b4 was played, if b4 is played here, then of course knight to a4, which can exploit the weaknesses of b6 and c5 squares. The pawn is guarding, of course, the b6 square, but if it advances to a5 to protect this pawn, then this is a potential weakness in the future that white may really take advantage of. So black is not rushing with this pawn. He rather prefers to play a move like knight b to d7, which certainly develops a piece and takes more control over the center. Also prepares to move less like e5 or c5 to challenge the center, which is a main idea of black in this opening. And the bishop h6, a first, I would say, somewhat dubious move. Of course, it's not for me to judge the mind of a chess genius like Kasparov, but this asks a question to black. If black goes castling kingside, then of course white will exchange and go h4 and will really go for the attack. After this pawn is advanced and it exchanges on g6, the queen comes to h6, and there are really a lot of mating ideas here. Topalow would definitely not be happy to go for such a position against Garry Kasparov. So he didn't castle, he simply took the bishop on h6 and forced the queen to move away from the center. Of course, the white queen is preventing the black king from castling kingside, but it's far away from the center and it does not support the pawns anymore. So now bishop to b7 by Topalow and a3 by Kasparov. It's important to play a3 now, because if he did something else, let's say he played, let's say h4, it doesn't really matter. If b4 is now played, knight a4 is no longer such a good move, because there is no pressure on the b4 pawn, and black does not have to make a weakness by advancing the pawn on a5 to a5 in order to defend the b4 pawn. So he played a3 to rule out this possibility of b4. e5, so black finally strikes in the center, gets ready for destroying this pawn duo in the center, and now castling queenside. So not only getting the king to safety, but also putting pressure on this queen, x-raying it, and so it moves away, allows black for castling queenside, but also reinforces the central pawn. And king b1, another multi-purpose move, getting the king to safety, so it is not subjected to any attack from the c-file or this dark square diagonal. And also, well, let's say it makes a lot of space for another pieces. The queen could potentially come to c1 one day, or the knight could make use of c1 to go to d3 or b3, which it actually does in this game. Simply allows for the knight to enter a better position. a6, reinforcing the b5 pawn, knight c1, so as I mentioned, the knight moves either to b3 or to d3 in order to simply control more squares, be a more influential piece. Black castles queenside and knight b3. So here, an important thing I think to understand is the structure of pawns and pieces around the king. As you can see, black king has a lot of protection, 3 pawns, 2 knights, and the queen can easily retreat to support it. So white's king is very safe. On the other hand, black's king is not safe at all. Actually, the pawns have advanced significantly away from it, and there are not a lot of well-coordinated pieces around it. So it already should suggest that white should aim for opening up the position and attacking black's king. So e takes d4 by black, and it's recaptured with a rook, and c5 played. So now black is making some sort of investment. Black is trying to get a lot of space on the queen side, which in the long run can be definitely to his advantage. But on the other hand, he's advancing his pawns away from his king, which makes his position much more vulnerable. So the rook dropped back to d1 and knight b6. It's very important for Kasparow and Topalow to push the pawn to d5. Why is that so? Well, the pawn on d6 is a backward pawn. It can be subject of an attack from all of white's pieces, and it's much better to exchange it for the active e4 pawn, which actually controls a lot of space in the center. So he's preparing that by bringing another piece to support the d5 square. g3, so Kasparov is getting ready to get his bishop either to g2 or h3, where it attacks the king or puts pressure on this bishop. And because this bishop in here on this f1 a6 diagonal is not as useful, I would say. It's simply attacking pawns that are protecting each other, that are strong, so it does not aim to exploit any weaknesses. King b8, simply moving away from the bishop h3, attacking c8 move, and knight a5. In here, another interesting decision was made by Topalow to preserve the bishop and move it to a8. It's important because Topalow also understands that this position may open up after the pawn on d5 is advanced. As we all know, the bishops are better in open positions because they can control more areas of the board than the knights. So it's not a very good investment to give up the bishop for the knight if the position is to be opened up. But on the other hand, this knight now is a very aggressive and active piece in black's camp. So that was an investment. Bishop h3, of course, developing the bishop, as I mentioned before, makes sense. And d5 by Topalow. The pawn on d5 is very well supported, so he's definitely ready to get rid of the backward pawn. Queen f4 check, bringing the queen back to the game with the tempo. King a7. Here I would like to point out that all of these squares that I pointed out in green are are actually attacked by some of the white pieces. So the black king, it may feel a bit surrounded. And it already should give you sort of an idea how dangerous this position is for black. Rook e1, bringing the last piece into the game and x-raying the queen, which really Topalow didn't pay a lot of attention to it. He played d4, attacked the knight on c3, which does not seem to have a good perspective, but it went to d5, which is crazy. But normally if it went to e2, then black's position is really good because his king is not in that much danger, and the pawns on the queen side are very well advanced and control a lot of space. So I would even say that black may be slightly superior after a couple of moves from here. But it didn't happen, and Kasparow played knight d5, going really for that fire. Topalow captured with a b knight. Of course, you don't want to take with a bishop, because if that happens, then of course, well, not only is your queen attacked, but also the skewer is threatened. So that will be winning for white, absolutely winning in this case. Now let's say queen d6, then it's even rook e7 is good. It doesn't matter, you can analyze it for yourself. This is completely winning then. You don't of course want to capture the rook, that's giving up the exchange. And taking with this knight is no good either, because after e takes d5 and say queen d6, now queen takes f7, wins the pawn with check. A very unpleasant position arises after knight c6. Again, you have to give up this bishop, and if queen takes c6, then of course rook e7, and you're not defending this position. So the only way that Topalow can take this knight is with a b knight. This is recaptured. Of course, there is no time to take the pawn because the rook is attacking the queen. Queen d6. There is a tension between queens, and Topalow would love to exchange them. If, say, queen takes d6 is played, then rook takes d6, and the pawn on d5 will be lost, and black will have a huge spatial advantage on the queen side. That's a lot better position for black. But Kasparow did not exchange queens, and he went forward. He played rook takes d4, a first mind-blowing decision in this game. He's sacrificing his rook on d4. And now Topalow's position is crumbling. If he does not take the rook, he's immediately lost. He lost the pawn already on d4. He lost all of his spatial advantage, and his king still has no safety. So if he played anything else than taking the rook, let's say the second best move is king b6, then of course his position does not get any better, and this rook may even stay here. The engine points out the move b4. But it doesn't matter. Topalow took the rook. Of course, this is an obvious decision. Why wouldn't you take the free rook? But there is much more to it. Kasparow played rook to e7 check and sacrificed yet another rook. Well, that's really mind-blowing, but this time Topalow was not able to take it. If he did, then white is winning in just 4 moves. You can take on d4 check. If, of course, black can give up the queen, yes, queen takes c5, king b8, and then queen b6 check, bishop b7, and wins. Yeah, this is checkmate. But, of course, we assume that he's a bit more intelligent and he goes to b8. But here it's all the same. We go to b6 check, and now there are only 2 moves. One of them is simply queen b7, which loses to knight c6 checkmate. You have to also see this bishop looking at the c8 square. This is checkmate. And if bishop to b7 is played, then it's mate in 2. After knight c6 check, the king has only 1 move, king a8, and now it's checkmate with queen to a7. So that's already a pretty impressive combination, and the way that Kasparov exploits the weaknesses of the black king is really impressive. Topalow decided to go to b6. If he wanted to go back to b8, well, then his position is getting no better. Kasparow can still take on d4 and aim for these mating combinations, and with his rook being here still, it's very dangerous. He's actually threatening mate in 1 with queen to a7. Let's say the only moves are, let's say, knight here, but then after bishop takes d7, rook takes d7, rook takes d7, queen takes d7, you have to understand that this rook on h8 is unprotected and it drops, and white is quite a lot better in this position. I think he's up a pawn and his position is very good. Let's say if king ever steps here, then again queen d4 check, king g8, and say queen b6, and this is already nearly mating. Very good position. Knight takes b7, queen takes b7. You can even go for this king and pawn endgame. White is definitely the preferred side with 2 pawns advantage. So Topalow had no choice but to go to b6 and attack the knight on a5, which is getting sacrificed as well. Queen takes d4 check, so still both pieces hanging. Topalow has to move the king, and he has no other option than to take the knight. Of course, there is no point in blocking with the queen, because then queen takes f6 check, queen d6, and rook takes f7, and this is slightly superior for white. He was going to be up a pawn probably in this endgame, but it was not played. Topalow captured yet another piece, but you have to see how far away did this black king go. This is his route, that's far, and it's only moved 26. b4 by Kasparow, the king is forced to go yet 1 square down the board. And after king a4, queen c3, now there is a mate in 1 threat. Queen to b3 is checkmate, so black has to prevent it, and he can only do so by taking control of the b3 square. And how can he do that? Well, it would seem that maybe this bishop taking on d5 is actually an idea, but it's losing. It's actually mate in 4. After king b2, you're preparing to play queen b3 and sacrifice your queen, and then take back with a pawn and get a beautiful checkmate with 3 pawns. The best move given here by the engine is, let's say, queen e6, but of course that's pointless because you simply take it. After f takes, you give this check, and there's simply no defense to it. There is checkmate on the board. So the only move that Topalow has left to take control of this square is to capture with a queen, and he did so. But now rook to a7, threatening yet another checkmate. Now rook takes a6 will be mate. So the only way to prevent that really is bishop to b7. If any move like rook to d6, trying to defend this pawn this way, is not working because king b2. And now there is mating threat again. So if queen d4 is played, queen takes d4, say, well, if you recapture, then of course you're losing immediately. So queen d4 doesn't make any sense, but that's the move actually suggested by the engine. There's simply no defense. How do you defend this square? No way. But why does this idea in here, king b2, not work? Well, here, of course, queen d4 actually was an idea initially of Topalow's, so that now queen to c3, b3 is not possible due to the pin. But of course, Kasparow understood that, played rook a7, and Topalow had to give up the bishop by playing bishop b7, and it's captured. And here, the engine says white's position is slightly superior, but I think it's here where black makes the major mistake and plays queen c4. Trying to exchange queens and take control of the b3 square. I would rather say maintain the control of the b3 square, but you know what I mean. Queen takes on f6, so grabbing a free knight and getting ready to snatch the pawn on a6. The only move to avoid mate really is king takes a3. Any other move is losing very quickly. Well, okay, rook d1 is the move pointed out by the engine as a good one, but still, it's far from safe. After queen b6, there are new mating threats, and it's not very easy to defend. And basically, to survive, black really has to be very precise and would have to go for this endgame in which white has a lot more pawns and a lot more active rook and a bishop that can become a beast. Let's say bishop here, bishop here. This is checkmating threat as well. Oh, there are some dogs shouting, wait. Okay, sorry. Barking. Dogs are barking. Yeah. So after queen takes f6, king takes knight e3, as I mentioned, queen takes a6 and king takes b4. The position seems stabilized. Black's king has the support of the queen, and it's not very obvious how to continue the attack from here. But Kasparow found another magnificent move, another sacrifice, c3 check, and it's a brilliant one. He sacrifices the pawn. Well, let's first see what happens if black declines the sacrifice. Well, it's obvious that if he goes here, then simply rook to c7 skewers and wins the queen. So no point in doing that. If the king goes to b3, then it's mate in 11, but you should understand that after queen a2 check, say king takes c3, and queen b2 check, king d3, and here bishop f1, another skewer, and again winning. So maybe capturing with a queen is an idea, but it's mate in 3. Queen takes b5 check, king a3, rook here, check, and checkmate. It's forced, there's no defense. So the only move here is to take with a king and go for a walk even deeper into white's position. Queen to a1 check, and well, here king d2 was played. King b4 is suggested by the engine, but it's still not good at all. If queen to b2 check, king c5, again this rook c7 wins. And if queen b3, then of course rook takes b5 wins just as much. So king takes, queen takes, easily winning position. So Topalow stepped to d2 and queen b2 check. So king d1. There is really no point in going to e1 because then it's simply allowing white to bring another piece in, so and the king goes to d1 anyways, so there is no point in allowing that. King d1 and bishop f1. So now white is getting ready to play queen e2 checkmate if this queen is ever moved from the protection of this square, and also of course puts pressure on the queen and sacrificing the bishop at the same time. If the bishop is captured, well, then of course it's made queen c2, king e1, and rook e7, queen e7, queen e2, and queen takes e2 checkmate. So the bishop is not possible to capture. Another brilliant sacrifice, by the way. Rook d2. So saying, okay, you take my queen, I take your queen. And if you dare to take my rook, well, then you're gonna get mated. So what to do now? Well, Kasparow found a simple solution. He played rook d7. Simply pinned this rook to the king. Now the rook cannot take the queen, so well, there is really no better move than simply to take this rook on d7 and give up the queen on c4. And it's not even possible to save this rook, because, okay, you have to see that, well, white is threatening to win a rook, but black can also take the bishop. And there is no way of saving the rook. If the rook is moved, say, to d7, then simply queen c1 is checkmate, and there is no defense to it. If rook d... Well, there is no way to save the rook, so he took the bishop and gave up the rook. And at this point, this position is totally winning, of course, and it's just about the endgame technique. But of course, black continued to play for a while because he had this passed pawn and the rook against the queen, so he can there is still some hope. Rook d3, so putting pressure on the pawn, preparing c3, queen a8, so of course bringing the queen here so that it controls some squares and also protects the pawn. c3, so now it's getting dangerous. The pawn can go to c2 with check and c1 queen. But there is no time for this. Queen a4 check, king e1, and f4, simply ruling out the possibility of black winning this pawn. f5 locking down the structure, but it's really it really is meaningless what black does. And now king c1, so that this king stays here forever and ever. Black can never get it out from there, and that means that this pawn will never promote. there is no way to kick the white king away from c1 because rook d1 was simply losing. So Topalow played rook d2, trying desperately to win this pawn maybe, or advance the pawn to c2, make white feel a bit uncomfortable. But Kasparow here played queen a7, and it was the last move of the game. It has to be understood that if rook takes h2, then queen g1 wins the rook. And if anything else, if c2, then still this queen e3 wins on the spot, queen g1 mate in this case. So, wow, every time I see this game I'm totally amazed how beautiful and how inventive this is. This is actually, I think, really the best game ever played. It has a number of sacrifices, a lot of positional play as well, some beautiful endgame technique, and really inventive ideas. Whenever I see this game, I think to myself, how far, how deep did Kasparov calculate everything from this move of knight d5? Because let's just see that at this point he already knew that he will sacrifice the rook on d4. Like, I can imagine that. But not only did he spot this idea that after this he can sacrifice another rook and force the king walk, he also continued it. And did he know that it will reach to this point? Did he calculate all of these possibilities, or was it just his intuition? Well, it's hard to say, but whatever it was absolutely amazing to see and very impressive at the same time. So I hope you enjoyed it as well. I hope you enjoyed the series, because this is the last video. This is a top 1 in my top 10 series. If you liked it, maybe you can encourage me to do more playlists like this, or maybe you have some suggestions. You can say them. You can state them in the comments section below. And well, if you have any questions to this game, I will try to answer it. Although I have to tell you, it's very difficult to understand brilliances like that. And well, see you in the next video. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.